So welcome to the fifth taster session we are running. So we're really delighted that you can join us today from wherever you are. So this session is aimed at all leaders. So the previous sessions have been much more specifically for women, but we're opening that up to all leaders. Welcome on this session, because we're going to look at what we can all do practically as allies to support women in our organisations. So today we've got myself, Orla Power, and Colette on the session for you today. So I've been interested in this area of women in leadership since specialising in diversity as part of my MBA. That was over 24 years ago now. And I oversee our Women in Leadership specialism. And we also have Colette Andrew Arthur from our team who's here today. So she's going to be talking as well. And not forgetting Mida, who is our producer in the background, helping us run everything smoothly in this session. So welcome if this is your first session. Just to let you know, in the first 4 sessions, we covered key topics that are in all our Women in Leadership programmes. And this session is an overview of the headwinds that we've explored, and specifically around this theme of allyship. And we've got one more session. So next week, we will be looking at mentoring. And that's both for mentors, mentoring women, and for women considering how to get the best out of mentoring for them. So all things to do with mentoring in the final session next week. So we hope these sessions are providing you with insights and development actions. We have sent out a manager toolkit of coaching questions that support the session that we're doing today. So that's been emailed as a resource. And we are running in a webinar format. So it's different to our normal learning platforms. It does limit interactivity, but we can use polls and chat. So we'll be using those as we go through. And we're aiming to complete within sort of the next 45 minutes or so. And we'll leave enough questions for time for questions or a refresh before your next meeting. If you want to get hold of us, you can get hold of us on ewill@lhh.com if you've got any queries. So why focus on women? Well, I would say in 2024, here we are making progress, but it is slow. So a decade ago, about half of FTSE 350 boards had no women, and now there are no all-male boards in the FTSE 350. And the majority have 3 or more women on their board. So while progress on the overall number of women in senior leadership continues, the latest research reveals it has been slow. It's increasing only half a percentage point. I think it's up to something like 32.4 or 5 in the past year. And the Government Equalities Office identifies that women are just not progressing in the workplace as fully as their talents would allow. And they're less likely to progress out of junior roles and into those senior roles. And we know that the last Lean In study identified that 2/3 of women under 30 want to be senior leaders. Yet, for every 100 men promoted into that first line manager role, only 87 women are moving forward. So for the 9th consecutive year, women face their biggest hurdle at that first critical step up into manager. So this is that broken rung that you can hear people talking about. So women fall behind at that first step and just can't catch up. And Harvard research found that early career success is proving to be crucial in determining how women advance. So if you're managing women in their first roles, how well you coach, develop and mentor them really casts the die for how they will progress longer term in their career. So pay real focused attention to those early career women. And then at the other end, for every woman at director level that gets promoted to the next level, we're having 2 women directors who are choosing to leave. So what I'm saying is there's still a lot more to do. We're making progress, but there's still a lot more to do on that journey to equity. And allyship, which we're going to be exploring today, really does make a difference, and we can all play a part in that. So thank you to all those who've joined the session today for being here. Visible support really matters, and you're already showing your allyship. And we know that allyship is an important lever in progress for women, and everyone can be an ally to support underrepresented colleagues. And our Colette's and our call to action in this session is to identify the practical actions that you can take to support women around you. So in our work, we find that there's often really great positive intent to support equity for women, but goodwill isn't enough. Goodwill is not enough on its own to shift the dial. And one of my colleagues, I think she described it perfectly for me when she said, it's the difference between call me if you need to talk versus, hey, I'm here, let's grab a coffee. How are you? How are you doing? So it's that difference in terms of positive action. So we'd like to explore today what you can practically do to support women leaders in your wider teams. So simple everyday habits that when added up across an organisation really make a difference to creating and reinforcing an inclusive culture. So we're going to talk through a number of areas. If you've got a burning question or thoughts, pop it in the chat or via the Q&A button, and we'll try and pick them up as we go along, but we'll definitely have some time for questions at the end. So we'd like you to just pause for a second and reflect on whether there are any headwinds for women that you are already aware of. And if you want to pop any in the chat, please do. We'd love to see those. And by headwinds, I mean biases, stereotypes, challenges and barriers, the things that slow progress for women. So let me give you some examples. So for example, you might be aware of headwinds, let's say in recruitment. So making sure you have a diverse list of candidates, diversity on interview panels, that sort of thing. Harvard research found that if you only have one woman on your shortlist for a job, there's statistically zero chance that they will get hired. But if managers can change the status quo of the finalist pool by including 2 women, then the women have a fighting chance of being selected. So this whole area of recruitment is really important. Or maybe a headwind is a lack of women role models at senior level, or maybe unpredictable working hours that create challenges. Yeah, I've seen some coming up there around caring, part-time working.
Self-limiting beliefs is also listed, which we have covered in some of our sessions already, but absolutely, definitely one there.
Yeah, and I saw
neurodiversity as well being called out as we know, lots of women later stage diagnoses affecting them.
Yeah, and can depend on the sector. Yeah, absolutely. So you're all from different organisations, and that's the thing. The headwinds will be different. They'll be different for individual women, and they'll be different for different organisations. So I'm sure there's lots of things that you're already aware of and perhaps addressing either individually as a manager or your organisation is. So we want to build on those further and give you some things to think about in this session. So inclusivity is about providing that additional support to create the level playing field. So by focusing on specific areas that are particularly relevant to women, we can help to address some of those headwinds that women face to progressing their careers to those more senior levels. And how do we know what to focus on? Well, LHH have done a big piece of research in US and Europe looking at organisations where women have been successful in progressing their careers. And we looked at organisations where this had not been the case. And we were able to identify 12 key areas to focus on. So the first three relate to career. So women who were successful in advancing had a longer term view of their career that they'd shared with people who could help them progress. And they had mentors and sponsors advocating and supporting them. And they networked strategically, both upwards and across their business. Successful women expressed a confidence in their strengths and abilities, and they had a belief that they could progress their careers, and they were willing to move out of their comfort zone to take on new opportunities for development. They were comfortable talking positively about their achievements and were able to influence upwards, having a strong profile and reputation, increasing their visibility. And women who are successful in advancing know how to add strategic value by working at the right level. They are seen as being strategic, and they have broad business and commercial acumen. So we've got 4 key themes that are areas for you as allies and champions of women leaders to focus on supporting women to thrive and accelerate their careers. Career activism, strengthening confidence and resilience, increasing personal impact and brand, and raising strategic value. So Colette and I would like to explore each one in a little bit more depth and share how you can increase your allyship in each of these areas. So we're going to start by looking at career headwinds, and I'm just going to share a little personal story, and then I'll hand over to Colette to take us through some points on this. So my story to share is that after university, in my first organisation, I quickly gravitated to training and development. So I really found my passion, I found my niche, and I was working on an amazing variety of projects and developing my skills as a facilitator. And I had a fantastic manager who continually stretched and motivated me. I loved what I did, and really I wanted her job. And I kept on focusing on developing my expertise. And then one day I happened to be dropping something off at her boss's office, and he wanted to have a chat. So he said, so Orla, what's next for you? Where are you heading? And of course I answered, well, I'd really love my manager's job. And he looked at me and he said, well, you'll be waiting a long time as she's not going anywhere soon. Would you consider leaving and doing the job elsewhere? So yes, I said I would. And I've talked to her about this, but she says I still have lots to learn. And Colin looked at me and he said, the problem you have, Orla, is that your manager doesn't want to let you go. And she knows how to keep convincing you to stay with interesting projects and opportunities, but that's not going to help you progress. So let's book some time to help you work out a career plan. And in that moment, I realised that I had been in the passenger seat and not in the driving seat of my career. And I had over-relied on one person's advice. And I'd been really sort of short-term job focused rather than longer-term career focused. So I'm going to hand over to Colette, who's going to talk us through a bit more about career headwinds and what allies can do.
Yeah, and that's such a lovely segue into what we're going to talk about in this session on career progression. So Orla's story neatly kind of connects us into what is really at the heart of many of the headwinds that women face here. So one of the factors for women who were successful in progressing their career in the research that Orla referred to was having a clear shared career plan. So a potential headwind for women is that they tend to think short term about the next job or opportunity rather than long term in terms of what each step might be building towards. And so, as Orla has described, women can potentially be maybe more opportunistic in taking jobs or roles that maybe leads to a much more haphazard career path, or maybe a sense of feeling stuck where they are in a particular role at a given time. Or as Orla's story neatly kind of pointed to, maybe not being in the driving seat of your own career. And this leading to maybe perhaps being guided by others, or indeed ending up as part of somebody else's career plan, as was the case in Orla's story. So when we think about what allies can do, it really leads us to think about having meaningful career coaching conversations that get women to really think about longer term in terms of what those steps might be for them and where they might be focusing on next in order to get them to that 1, 3, 5-year career plan. So what is it and how should they develop towards that longer term goal? And we really want to call the distinction here that this isn't about performance reviews. This isn't a performance conversation, really something quite different, a career coaching conversation that focuses on, as I say, what is next for that individual woman in the next 1, 3, 5 years, and asking them questions around what is it they want to be developing to build towards. So I'm going to read some statistics here. There's lots of research that we want to reference here. So a report from Manpower indicates only 1 in 4 women have had a career coaching conversation about how their skills can be developed to ensure they have the capabilities for those future roles or future jobs that they're targeting. And only 1 in 5 are having ongoing career dialogue with their manager. And so we know that those career coaching conversations are really critical in engaging women in discussions to align their own career goals to that of the organisation, and to be able to then use that as an opportunity to reaffirm those women's strengths and those development opportunities and career opportunities that they might be building towards. Another piece of research here, so the 2023 Women in the Workplace report indicates that women are more ambitious now than they were before the pandemic. And that's really interesting to kind of reflect on perhaps some of the reasons why that might be. And of course, the pandemic really fueled flexibility in terms of more women working from home. And we think that that may be one of the things that's fueling that ambition, is that women can see a career opportunity to progress while still being able to have the flexibility that they perhaps want and need. So we're going to give an opportunity. We'd love to hear from you. And one of the things that we'd like to do is really focus our next question to those women who are on the call. So what we want to really think about is whether those women who have joined this webinar have recently had a satisfactory career coaching conversation in the last year. So I want to really think about whether it is something that you are currently engaged in. So if you're a woman on the call, I'd love to get your feedback as to whether you have if you feel that you've had a really good career coaching conversation in the last 12 months. So yes or no. We'll just give you a moment or two to respond to that. And then when it's ready, you can publish once we've got people responded.
I think it's settling down now. Mida, do you want to publish that?
Great. Interesting, yeah. So majority, 56, more than half not having had a career coaching conversation, but actually quite reassuring.
Yeah, that's still better. Often we find it's down around 25, 30%. When you ask a mixed group, it tends to come out round about 48%. So that's, yeah, encouraging.
Very encouraging. We've got a good group here of people having the right type of conversation. So we just need to tilt the balance a little bit more in the favour of yes. Good, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to share that. So one of the things that women have shared when they're asked what do they need in order to improve career development conversations, the majority are responding to say they want greater transparency. So they need a clear understanding of the expectations on both sides, including information about career progression, open conversations about where they stand and what's expected of them to advance. And as part of, sorry, Paula.
Well, I was just going to pick up on something that Shazia's put in that she had a career conversation and it resulted in a lot of objectives with no support resources or training to achieve them. So yeah, there is the second part of that, which is the support, which, you know,
isn't it? Yeah, the sort of, surfacing those aspirations, but then being able to backfill that with, as you say, the necessary support to make that come to fruition. Lovely point. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So as part of the career conversations that we really want to encourage allies on the call to take forward and start to make happen, is actually encouraging women to have a personal board of directors. So what do we mean by that? So Just as we know organisations benefit from knowledge and experience in terms of diversity of ideas and advisors, we know that that is also the case for women navigating their careers. So a personal board of directors is a group of between 5, maybe 10 individuals that can help an individual woman make sound decisions about their career. So give them advice, give them feedback, help challenge assumptions, maybe broaden their professional network. I'm going to come on to talk about networking in just a moment, but help them to really connect in with a broader network, brainstorm ideas, and generally expand their perspective and thinking. So not just their manager, but really encourage them to think about maybe colleagues, maybe from the past, mentors, perhaps in a role or an area that you're aspiring to get into, maybe those in your industry but a different organisation, or perhaps those in a completely different industry for a very different perspective. And we also say maybe thinking about the sort of spread of perspectives in terms of experience. So somebody who's maybe 15 years older, as well as somebody maybe 15 years younger, to really have those alternative perspectives. And you might want to think about it in terms of maybe a good influencer, good networker, having a technical expert in your board of directors, a thought leader, a good coach. So really we want to help focus on building a breadth of input that, as we say, can help encourage a range of different perspectives to encourage that thinking. And so as allies, we can really help focus on having high quality, future focused career conversations that really put women in the driving seat of their career and their aspirations and help them to think about how they can practically take that forward. The other thing we know is when women think about careers is that women tend to rate their abilities accurately or indeed underestimate. And there's a view that women can take less risks to go after opportunities when maybe not 100% matched with a job role or opportunity. And so we know that men, by comparison, are more likely to go for opportunities if perhaps they're matched to maybe just 60% of the requirements, and the rest they're prepared to learn on the job when they get there and maybe expect to have that degree of stretch and learning when they arrive. Whereas women much more expecting of themselves to be fully matched before they're ready. And so that would suggest that women are more likely to be considering less opportunities than men and putting themselves forward for fewer opportunities for promotion. So they're more restrictive, more dismissive about which opportunities they consider to be relevant for their career progression. Men, on the other hand, as I say, much more prepared to go for more opportunities and as such are increasing their chances of landing that next job promotion or career move. And in the work that Orla and I do with our Women in Leadership programmes, we consistently see this as a theme that comes through for women that attend. And we hear the common sort of feedback that I'm just not ready yet. I don't think I have this one aspect I'm looking for. Lots of people will be better than me applying, and so on. And so as allies, we encourage you to supportively challenge those limiting beliefs. We've heard about some of those already in the chat. So asking questions around, well, what would it take you to be ready? What strengths do you have that you can showcase? What support do you need to be considering this opportunity? And really help expand that that kind of mindset around an opportunity that might present. And again, just going to share a story that came up on one of the programs that I was running. So a senior female had joined one of my sessions, and she recently shared how when she joined an organisation in a short space of time, an opportunity presented for promotion, and she felt it was too soon, and she hadn't been in her role long enough, and so she wasn't going to apply for it. And it actually took another colleague in her organisation to point out the role to her and the fit that it had with her experience and her background for her to consider applying for that role. And she did apply, and she did land that role for herself. And so I guess the reason that this story is sort of relevant and pertinent to this point here is that she was dismissive of that opportunity because she had put some restrictions around it, that she hadn't earned her stripes in the organisation yet, that she hadn't been there long enough. But that was her own limiting beliefs that she was bringing to that opportunity. And actually, you know, that that wasn't necessarily the case. And in this example, she did land that role and went on to have further promotion after that. And so as champions, use those coaching questions to really uncover if somebody is holding themselves back from an opportunity, what sits underneath that? What limiting beliefs or assumptions might they be making? And then we also know in terms of career headwinds that women tend to have a different use of their network. So women tend to have better networks down through the organisation, and tend not to have senior mentors or sponsors in their network. So men tend to seek out mentors more readily, and women typically need to be found and encouraged. So it's not that women aren't willing mentors, they are, but other women are simply not seeking them out until prompted. And a recent research by DDI found that 63% of women had never actually had a mentor. And there are lots of benefits to both sides in terms of mentorship. So we know that people who are mentored are better prepared for promotions, stay with their organisations longer, feel more satisfied with their jobs, rate higher on performance indicators, and have great impact in their organisations, and are perceived as more innovative, maybe more creative, more resilient to setbacks. And those leaders themselves who are indeed mentors and who advocate for others are perceived as having stronger commitment to their organisation. Their leadership is perceived to be stronger by others. They have a greater sense of well-being and purpose in their job, so greater personal job satisfaction. And they tend to build and enhance their own network. And so encouraging women to have mentors has, as I say, many benefits, both for the organisation, the leader being a mentor, and the women themselves. And as Orla highlighted at the front end of this taster session, indeed, we've got a session on mentorship next week, so that we cover that off. And so just to finish this section really on networking, we know that women tend to use that network for personal support to get the job done. And so their networks tend to be focused down through the organisation, but they tend to have less well-developed strategic networks upwards. So they lack maybe those individuals at senior levels who are likely to advocate for them, speak highly of them in the right forums, spot opportunities that they can involve women in. And so that breadth of network tends to be siloed for women, maybe siloed into their work area to get the job done. Or indeed, maybe, as we would describe it, a convenience network. So a network that, when left to our own devices, we are more inclined to connect with people that are like us. So it limits that breadth of ideas, diversity of interest that will help expand individual thinking. And then finally, we know that women tend to prefer to network with their own gender. And of course, as you reach those more senior levels, with fewer women reaching those senior levels, that then has an impact on the degree to which we might be expanding our network. And so finding opportunities to network in ways that suit everybody and is inclusive of everybody is really important. So maybe making sure that it's at times that are going to suit all working schedules, and has applicability to all interests, to make sure that everybody really leverages those opportunities for networking, including women. So just pause there to check if there's anything in the chat. Nothing else, I think, at the moment.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks, Colette. And I just want to mention about, someone did put in the chat about the worksheet. So we've sent a manager toolkit. So in your coaching toolkit, we've given some examples of questions that you can be using for each of the themes. So for example, with this theme that Colette's talked about, what level of sponsorship do you have? What do you need? What opportunities would energize and excite you? So we've given some examples of coaching questions that you can use. And we've also suggested some reflective questions for you to think about as a manager. So are there any biases getting in the way? Are you making any assumptions about career paths or ambition for the women in your team? Do you assume that those who ask outright for opportunities must want them the most? So we're encouraging you to think about any biases that might be creating headwinds for women. I can see there's a few notes in the chat that people might not have received that. So Mida has popped that in the chat. And also, if you still don't receive it, then just drop us a note in ewill@lhh.com afterwards, and we'll make sure that you get that, because it's a really useful toolkit that summarises some of the things that Colette and I are talking about in this session, and a great takeaway that you can share with your manager and other managers as well around these topics. Brilliant. Thanks, Colette. So let's look at confidence and resilience. So again, I'll tell a little story to bring this to life. So one of our directors tells this story about recruiting for a head of sales a couple of years ago. So our head of sales leaves and the job is advertised internally to the sales team, which is a 50-50 male-women ratio. And as the deadline approaches for this role, only men have applied, no women in the team. So he starts speaking to each of the women in the team, asking why they haven't applied. And he gets responses like, well, I've only been here 6 months, so I still have a lot to learn. I've got lots of commitments outside of work and I'll have to work long hours, so I don't think it'll really work for me. There are others in the team better or who've been here longer. I'm not sure I'm ready. And to each one of those women, he said, well, that's not a barrier to me. If you are the best candidate, I promise you that we will work out how to not let that get in the way of you being a success in that role. So having spoken to all the women, he gets a 50-50 shortlist. He interviews everyone, and the standout candidate is the woman who said, I've only been here 6 months. But he offers her the job. She was the standout candidate, but she's not happy. And so he offers her the job and she says, I'm not sure I'm up to it. And he always talks about, at this point, he said he almost gave in because he just didn't want to put pressure on her. But instead, he said to her, look, take some time to think about it. Think about all the things that are holding you back, and then let's go through them and work out whether we can make this role work for you. And that's what they did. So she went away, she thought about it over the weekend and came back with all of her concerns, the things that she felt would get in the way, and they worked through them and overcame and found solutions for all of those. And Karis became one of the most successful and popular head of sales that we've had. And she's now moved on to her next more senior role. But she does talk about how she realised she was holding on to a narrative that was, you have to do your time before you get promoted, and that had held her back. But because her manager understood the headwinds for women, he was really able to adjust his approach to be that inclusive leader. So our Elevating Women in Leadership study at LHH found that women who were successful in advancing to those more senior levels differed markedly in their mindset and beliefs. So they really held a belief that there were no barriers for themselves. There might have been factors all around them that could have prevented their success, but they didn't let that get in the way of their own beliefs around what they could personally accomplish. And women are more likely to doubt their own potential and hold on to those negative thoughts, such as imposter syndrome. That's the famous one, that feeling of I'll be found out. And it's typical when we take on a new job or opportunity, but it can happen at any time. And we're not saying that men don't have those negative thoughts as well, but it is that women tend to hold on to them for longer. So as allies, let's have those coaching conversations that challenge these negative self-perceptions or these assumptions that might be holding us back. So what makes you think that? What evidence do you have? How could you think differently about that? So when you see women brush aside opportunities, just like the story that I told, maybe dig a bit deeper, help them to identify what might be holding them back and how to look at the situation differently. One of the other things we know is that women can often strive for perfection. We put others first and we overly multitask. It becomes an overstrength. And that can lead to lots of spinning plates, which means feeling overwhelmed and as though nothing gets your full attention. So that multitasking can become an overstrength. And of course, studies have shown that women are generally better at multitasking and we do it more often. And of course, that's something to be proud of and we use it to our advantage. But the challenge is when multitasking leads to less productivity, quality of performance and poorer well-being. So it causes us to become distracted and overwhelmed. And it can reinforce that frenzy of being tactical and even scattered in our communications. So allies can really support women to balance their energy and work flexibly as needed. So encourage them to create boundaries and to stick to them. So for example, leaving on time, not taking on too much, saying no. And if women have high empathy, they can feel, bad saying no or asking for help because they can see that everyone else is busy. So have conversations about workload, delegation and well-being. So women are socialized to value people's needs and feelings, quite often above their own. They value connection. So saying no and managing boundaries can be really challenging. So in your toolkit are questions like, how can you create boundaries? What do you need to do to maintain these boundaries? When do you feel most confident? What's possible for you? And we've asked you to think about, your own perhaps biases. So do you work hard to understand what might be holding women back from going for opportunities? Do you pile on work without talking about resourcing or prioritization? So just some things for you to reflect on as managers of women. Okay, let's look at impact and brand. So everyone has a profile and reputation. Do you know what yours is? What people say about you when you're not in the room? And do you want that to take on a life of its own? Or do you want to manage your message and how the world sees you so that you'll be better positioned to achieve your goals? So, for example, back to my previous story. So I'd worked in that organisation. I had moved on. So I took the career advice and I'd moved on from my previous organisation. And I'd been working in consultancy for 5 or 6 years. And I had my eyes on a head of leadership role. But I felt as though I wasn't getting the exciting strategic projects that would help me develop into that role. And I realized that I was holding a mindset of, if I work really hard, someone will notice me, rather than being career active. So I started thinking about my profile and reputation, and I asked a range of people for 5 words that best described me. And I was happy with what was coming back, most of it, except one word came back a few times. And the description was all of your low maintenance. And I was seen as someone who was helpful and got the job done well, a doer, an executor. So I worked on changing that. So whenever I was given work, I asked more questions about, how does this link to the bigger picture? I thought about how I could achieve more than was expected and how I could increase the visibility of what I was working on and the results. And I changed my reputation of low maintenance to strategic. So I found ways to talk positively about my achievements, be future focused, and talk strategically about how the business was developing. So that when the head of leadership development role came up a year or so later, I had developed a profile and reputation as the obvious choice for the role. So hopefully that's got you thinking. And as I mentioned, women generally feel awkward about talking about their accomplishments and expect their results to speak for themselves. If I work really hard and do a good job, it will get noticed. And so we tend to find that women tend to hide their light more often. And we tend to chalk up our success to luck or good timing versus our skills, talents, and expertise. So voicing successes can feel like bragging. So we're socialized not to do that. So we can be challenged with self-advocating for ourselves, for development, for promotions, for negotiating salary, whatever it is, we can find that hard. So the more as allies you can do to notice and celebrate women's achievements, raise their visibility, that really helps. Because we can tend to brush off or play down positive feedback. So really pay attention to ensuring that feedback you give is being fully acknowledged. So check it out. What are you most pleased with? Be really specific about the value they've added. And women build their confidence by focusing on a deep expertise, and we can neglect developing breadth and transferability of skills. And that's a really important stepping stone to those more senior roles. So not just being capital I-shaped, but being capital T-shaped, so that you have that cross-functional experience. So as allies, look for opportunities for the women in your team to build that breadth across the business. So business breadth versus depth. Make sure your feedback covers business performance and commercial acumen, not just style. So studies have shown that women not only receive less feedback than men, but the feedback we get is much less focused on our impact and business objectives and more on our style of communication and our behaviours. And then finally, in public forums, women talk less than men, and when they do, their ideas are often not picked up or attributed to them. So men and women have different natural speaking styles. So men are naturally more assertive, they speak up more, they can interrupt more often. And women are more expressive and speak up less often when they're in a minority. And we can often find it hard to break into a conversation. So many women share with us on our Women in Leadership programs that they realise that they've been conditioned not to speak up in certain situations, or they give up quickly when they're spoken over. So as allies, be aware of contributions in group settings and find ways to give women airtime or pick up on contributions that might have been missed. Make sure that you're drawing women into the conversation. So if you've got any additional thoughts, what's your perspective on this? Try and be inclusive. That can really help. Or the next time you hear a woman making a good point in a meeting, just notice and express your appreciation and try repeating that. So, oh, Colette, that was a really good point that you made on such and such. You know, what does everyone else think? So you're reinforcing that. This was something that the women in the Obama administration did very successfully. They called it amplification. So they had a tactic where one woman repeated another woman's key point while crediting her. So it was a really clever way to echo the statement and discourage others from taking credit for the idea. So as allies, you can do that. Really make sure that you amplify those thoughts and points. And really check your own thinking. Do you create visibility and recognise success equally across your team? Do you expect people to speak up for themselves and forget to be aware of everyone's contributions in meetings? And likewise, questions you could ask around this theme of impact and brand. So you could ask questions, you know, what are your strengths? Where do you think you add value? Where could you benefit from having more profile? So these are the sorts of questions that you could explore with women in your team around impact and brand. Lovely. So I'm going to hand over the last area to Colette for adding strategic value.
Yeah, indeed. So we're going to look at strategic mindedness and working at the right level and how these relate to the progression of women who, as we've mentioned, go on to excel. So the research has shown that women actually are perceived as less strategic, and not necessarily because the capability is lacking, But because things get in the way, such as what we pay attention to, where we focus our time, how we communicate, and how we build those relationships across the business. And so think about whether it's always women that pick up the action points in meetings whilst others sit back, taking the role maybe perhaps of perceived doer, order taker, executor. And of course, these types of behaviours can perpetuate being trapped in the weeds whilst leaving others time and space to move into more strategic activities. And over time, that can, of course, lead to false perceptions that women are best in roles where they are executing, adept at the details essential to keeping the ship running, rather than having those strategic capability, the strategic capability, to think longer term and to contribute bigger ideas and to influence stakeholders needed for success. And we all know that obviously that is not the case. Harvard Business Review studies have found that women tend to also volunteer more for those non-promotable tasks more than men, and that women are more frequently asked to take such tasks on, and that when they're asked, they're more likely to agree to those. And when I talk about non-promotable tasks, what we're referring to are those that are of benefit to the organisation, but don't contribute to somebody's performance, evaluation, or career advancement. So these might be tasks that are traditional housekeeping for the office, covering for a colleague, maybe serving on a committee that hasn't got high ranking or isn't particularly impactful or has high visibility across the organisation. And of course, these types of activities can have serious consequences if disproportionately it's always women who are saddled with taking those on. And of course, they have that limited visibility or impact across the organisation. And so studies have demonstrated that although men or women are not particularly keen to volunteer for them, women do volunteer more. So it's not that there is a gender preference towards engaging with those types of activities, but more that women are more likely to put themselves forward because there seems to be an expectation that is shared that women will do so, and so do so. And so it's about making sure that women don't consistently put themselves into that role. And of course, what we can't advise is that women just say no to it, because of course that's going to create problems in and of itself, but looking for ways to distribute those tasks more equitably. And so if you notice that you're always taking the minutes or writing up action, actually start suggesting that people take it in turns, or that there is a rotation into that. And that's come out again on our programme. An individual actually did that with really great impact, a real small change that made a big impact. So one of the individuals on our programme, she was a senior woman, she was on a senior leadership team, and she noted actually through the programme that she always takes note when she attends those meetings. And she realised that by doing so, she was actually starting to pigeonhole herself in that doer role, and felt that she was trapped, and that it had just become an expectation of that's how she contributed to the meeting. And so she made a change at the next meeting. And at the start, she made a point that she would prefer if note-taking was rotated, so that she could concentrate on contributing to the meeting more, and that she would be happy to take turns also in chairing the meeting in turn. And of course, that subtle change had a big impact in terms of how she was then perceived in her contributions in that committee. And we know that women are taught to be good team players, to pitch in, but that can lead to more operational work being distributed towards them. So making sure as an ally that you are sharing those strategic opportunities with women and encouraging them to focus on adding full strategic value when joining those opportunities. And of course, time spent in execution leaves less time for strategic activities, and that vicious cycle can perpetuate then, being very hard to sort of break out of that execution type role rather than strategic. So taking on too much, difficulty saying no, letting go of control can all build into the picture of making it more challenging for women to step out of that and to contribute. at a strategic level. So as an ally, making sure that you are having regular conversations about workload, priorities, delegation, encouraging time built into their schedule for thinking and how they will lift their head up above the parapet to look out and across the business, and providing coaching and feedback that builds business acumen and strategic mindedness, not just on style and tone of communication, as Ola has said, is quite often where feedback is levelled at women more than men. And the other thing that we wanted just to call out here is that women can overlook or turn down opportunities for stretch, to stay in their comfort zone. And so really focusing on how you can build that confidence that new opportunities are achievable and that they can succeed by stretching themselves out of their comfort zone, and taking those risks in learning can be really critical in helping them to get out of their own way and to really apply themselves in new and different ways that get them noticed in strategic ways. So really helping them to take advantage of opportunities that present. So just to sort of finish this section, really want you to think about, you know, are you sharing strategic opportunities equitably across your team, or are they landing more so with men versus women in your team? Are your non-promotable tasks shared fairly, or where are they currently sitting, and what adjustments can you make to those to make sure that they do sit equally across men and women alike, in order for them not to have a disproportionate effect on women in your team. So as we end on this section, you're going to
yes, let's see
what
what
the behaviours.
Yeah, let's see what people have thought about what we've talked about. I hope that's got you thinking about the 4 key areas and how you can support women to thrive and progress. So I think we'll just run a final poll to see which of these resonate with you that we've talked about today. So we've talked about creating opportunities to network, giving exposure to senior leaders, coaching and feedback that builds business acumen, career coaching conversations, challenging yourself around unconscious bias, recruiting and promoting from a diverse pool, meaningful stretch assignments, mentoring, supporting flexibility, and assisting with career planning. So let's just do a poll. Which of these do you focus on, or will you focus on as a result of this session? What's it got you thinking about? What are the things that resonate with you? So we'd love you to pick those that you do or will focus on most. And we'll see what comes out of the poll. These are all outlined in your coaching toolkit. So as well as researching the behaviours and beliefs of women who excel, we also identified these 10 specific behaviours that leaders who are champions of gender diversity are twice as likely to demonstrate. So all of these, if you're a strong ally, you'll be twice as likely to demonstrate these. So they're all in your coaching toolkit that you were sent with examples. So let's just publish that, Mida. So I think we've got some good answers there. So challenging negative perceptions comes out as the highest. And then we've got challenging around unconscious self and others, giving more exposure to senior leaders, and coaching and giving feedback. Brilliant. But there's a good spread across all of those. So it looks like all of those have resonated. Oh, let me just move the dial down because there was a few more I missed there. Oh, so also, what other ones scored highly there? Mentoring women, yeah, and assisting with career planning. Brilliant. So a really good spread across all of these areas. What we found in the research was these are the top 5. So those were the ones that came out as the ones that allies of women were doing the most. So thank you for listening to our session. As I say, we've got our coaching tool that's been in the chat that was sent to you, or if you don't get it, do message us and we can send that through to you. I did just want to share that in our women in leadership programs, we always include a session like this for managers to help them understand the headwinds women face. And we also run this session for any organisations who feel their leaders would benefit from knowing more about the headwinds women can face in progressing to senior levels. And it might have struck you that these behaviours suggested a really just, good, inclusive talent management practice that should be applied to everyone. And of course, you're right. Gender allies know that women face unique headwinds and need that greater effort and focus. So it's the small, everyday actions that create an equitable and inclusive culture. So we hope that you're taking some actions forward from today. We'd love to see any in the chat if there's anything specific that you'd like to share. And we want to say thank you for your allyship support for women leaders. It really is goodwill and positive actions that really change the dial on creating an organisation where everyone can thrive and progress. So we're going to turn those, hopefully, headwinds into tailwinds for women. So thank you. We're just going to stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions. I think there's one in the Q&A, so I just want to make sure we've answered that before we close. And if we miss your question in the chat, then as I say, please do email us on ewill@lhh.com. Let me just pop that up actually. And so there it is, ewill@lhh.com. But I think there's what, Mida, is there a question in the Q&A that we should answer before we close?
Yes, so the question is, how do you get this topic on the radar of older and/or male stakeholders? I've had so many conversations about this recently, but often find it hard to get it to really land with some older stakeholders and men in particular.
Yes, well, so as I mentioned, offering, well, one of the things, if you're doing anything for women in your organisation, so either running programmes or even broader leadership programmes, consider having a session built into programmes on this so that you're drawing in those managers when they've got a participant on the programme. So we found that's really effective. And once you get a number of managers going, actually, that was really useful, everyone should have this. So we've had that in quite a few situations where the word spreads, and that can be a way of doing it. Or maybe just using the opportunity to have some open sessions. So I think both Colette and Colette, you've run one recently, actually, which is open to everyone. And there is goodwill out there, so everyone wants to understand a bit more. So just offering and having these conversations can make a difference. Anything I've missed, Colette, on that?
No, I don't think so. I think actually that ending on that point around goodwill can often be quite a good hook to really open up the conversation around the role of allyship, and really leaning into the idea that it's not just enough to have that best of intention towards everybody in the organisation for inclusivity, but actually deliberate intent being a critical part of that is something that I've certainly found quite triggering for male stakeholders to really understand. And the presentation of the headwinds themselves and the research that backs that often can be quite enlightening for male stakeholders who maybe haven't really appreciated what those headwinds mean for career progression for women, and so helping them to really get closer to that and the practicalities of what they can do to change that can often help land it a little bit easier. But yeah, sometimes there's a journey to go on culturally for an organisation also.
Yeah. Thanks, Colette, and thank you for the question. Thanks everyone that's joined for this session. As we say, next session is on mentoring, so we'd love to see you back again in a week's time for our final session. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.